Welcome everyone to our church and to our summer series. For those who might be visiting us for the first time, we have this habit of preaching in series. We pick a topic and we unpack it over a series of weeks. And so today we begin our new one as we start into July. And for those of you who are just passing through, you can always follow this or any other message by visiting our website at stalphonsus.net and click messages. Now, for those of you who like challenges, I think you're going to love this series. We're calling it All In. We're going to be giving you the same challenge that Jesus gave his disciples 2,000 years ago. To go all in when it comes to following him. To go all in to committing yourself to his church. To go all in giving him everything you have, so that in return, he can give you the biggest reward. Many of you have probably played or at least are familiar with the popular game Texas Hold'em. So you're likely familiar with the term all in. At any time in the course of playing this game, a player can decide to put all of his chips on the table. He bets his entire stack. Everything that he has to offer, he puts on the table, win or lose. When a player does this, he's basically saying, I'm betting everything I have. I'm committing all I've got. That's why we chose this title, because it exemplifies what we mean when we talk about going all in. We mean giving all you've got, committing everything to the Lord. After all, that's his call for us. He's calling us to go all in when it comes to faith. All day, every day. That's his call to each and every one of us, to go all in the many ways of our life. So let's dive right into our topic today. We're going to turn to the Gospel from St. Luke that we read from earlier. We read this: "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Now, this particular verse actually has a special meaning to me. This verse has everything to do with why I'm standing here today. Back when I was in university, or back in the day, I was struggling to identify God's call and plan for me and for my life. I was actually seeing a priest for spiritual direction. It's where anybody who's serious about their faith goes, to talk to a priest to see how things are going and how God is working in your life. And this one particular day, he kind of got fed up with me for making excuses for not wanting to follow the Lord and give priesthood a shot. After all, I was dating. I wanted a normal life. I wanted to have a career that was just around the corner for me. And he was fed up. He used some pretty strong language. But he told me to go home and to pray and meditate and grab the Bible and see what God wants to say to me through the Bible. See, oftentimes God speaks to us through Scripture. So he says, go home, pray, meditate on God's call for you. Flip through the pages, and wherever your thumb lands, read that passage. I thought, this is kind of hokey, but I'll try it. And I landed right here. Luke chapter 10, verse 2. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. God's got a sense of humor. If I had sat on the fence and not cared, I wouldn't be here today. Eventually, you have to decide that you're going to let God's presence in your life change your life. I stopped avoiding God's call for me, and I responded. I went all in. I committed to giving seminary a shot, and I gave it my all. And I think I'm still giving it my all today. You know, for so many of us, faith is just another part of our lives, right? You know, we've got our friends over here, our kids, the school that we go to, the music that we listen to, faith, the sports team I root for, even though Kawhi's gone. All of that, right? All these are just different parts of our life, and they all fit so neatly together. But faith, by its definition, cannot just be another part of our life. Christ's presence in our life should change our life. The apostles are amazing examples of this. When Jesus said that he wanted to send out laborers into the harvest, they dropped everything to do just that. They left their families, they left their jobs, they left their livelihood and what they knew, and they just followed. Check it out. See, I am sending you out like lambs in the midst of wolves. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals. Jesus sends them out with nothing. They only have one other companion and the clothes on their back. Jesus is telling them to strip away absolutely everything, make themselves essentially defenseless and destitute, and then go out in the midst of wolves. They had to trust in a radical way that God would come through for them, that God would provide for their most basic needs in a world that was quite physically harsh and also incredibly dangerous. Just think about it. The apostles were left without any supplies or any equipment. They couldn't buy any lodging. They couldn't even buy a snack for the road. They had to hope that wherever God led them, people there would give them enough food and water to survive. The apostles would see that any food given to them, any lodgings provided, would actually be a gift from God through other people. They would learn to see these things as God looking out for them. And it would automatically increase their trust in God, knowing that God provides. Now let's take this a step further. The disciples couldn't perform miracles. They couldn't preach radical sermons or do anything like that. They weren't God. They didn't have the power. And yet Jesus tells them to go out just like that? Well, not quite. Jesus told them to go out and watch all the things that God could do. See, Jesus knew that any miracles that would happen, they would automatically recognize them as gifts, as God's work. The disciples would see any blind man that was cured, any demons that were driven out, any lives that were changed as gifts from God through them. They would learn to see these things as God working through them. And it would automatically increase their trust in God. This was not setting them up for failure. It was setting them up for growth. Through all of this, Jesus was setting them up to be able to grow in trust for the Lord. And it's the sort of growth that they had to go all in on. If they hadn't, they might have attributed these miracles to themselves. But they had nothing. So they knew it couldn't be of themselves. They knew that it had to come from God. So how does this help us? How does this help us now in 2019 in Peterborough, Ontario? Well, God's probably not asking you to quit your job or leave your family or walk to Africa without a cent in your pocket, although he may be calling some of you to missionary work in some way. But there are proper ways to discern that and to answer that call. So if we're not being called to go all in the same way that the disciples were, how can we go all in our current state of life and wherever that might be? How can we still go all in? Well, God is calling us to go all in when it comes to trusting Him. And I think that this can happen in a twofold way, like it did for the apostles. Firstly, we can grow by trusting God to provide for us physically. Okay? Now, maybe this is an area that you feel confident in. Maybe you've got a great steady job, a nice house, a good car. Maybe you've never missed a mortgage payment and you've got money to spare. Or maybe you don't feel so confident. Maybe you're not quite sure how you're going to make ends meet. Maybe you've just lost your job, or your credit is blackmarked, or more likely, you're somewhere in between. And while not everything is great, it is enough to get by. Well, it's difficult to talk about trusting God's provision to such a diversity of examples and experiences. So instead of trying to address each individual situation, I'm just going to say this one thing, this one general principle that everyone, regardless of the level of need that you find yourself in, should abide by. And that is this: remember the giver, not the gift. Remember the giver, not the gift. Remember where everything you have comes from. And remember where everything you don't have comes from, too. This is helpful because it does inspire gratitude for the things that you have and humility in having them. Also, it does discourage envy for what you don't have. And it grants a trust that when you need something, God, who is the giver of everything that is good, is going to be able to provide for you. See, when we focus on the gifts themselves, as we often do because they're tangible, right? Like when you get a gift, you're able to physically hold it. So when we focus on the gifts themselves, because the gifts are tangible more so than the one who gives them, when we focus on those gifts, we start to get more materialistic, even dissatisfied, even jealous. We get greedy. Just think of your kids at Christmas time. Why do you tell your kids to thank everyone who gave them gifts? It's because you don't want them turning out greedy. You want them to get their focus on the giver and not on the gift. And I can't really tell you why it is that way, but I can tell you that time and time again, I've seen it happen, that regardless of people's state in life, the most trusting and happiest people are always the ones who focus gratitude on the giver of all good gifts. The second way in which we need to grow in trust in order to go all in our faith is to grow in trusting God to provide for us spiritually. If you think about it, there is likely some spiritual goals that you have. We've all got them, right? Maybe it's to become more patient with your kids, or to gain better self-control around food. Maybe it's to pray a little more every day, or to be a better husband, or to quit that addiction for good, or whatever it might be for you. That list could literally go on and on and on. We all have goals for bettering ourselves. And with those goals, we often also have a long list of disappointments in our attempts to reach those goals, right? We are creatures of habit. And sometimes failure can feel like it's becoming our habit. But failure is not even a possibility for God. Failure, not a possibility for God. So what if you let God control that aspect of your life? What if you wanted to stop gossiping, for instance, at work, and instead of just going into the break room where your gossiping buddies are hanging out, gritting your teeth and hoping for the best, what if instead you just surrendered that to God? What would happen? What if you just trust God with it? Now, I'm definitely not up here saying that you should just quit trying or lay back and assume that God is just going to wave a magical wand and solve all of your problems for you. That's not how it works. That's not the way it is. You have to put in the effort. We've always got to put in the effort. I am saying that your efforts will go a lot further when you unite them with the Lord. You do what you can do, and then let God do something incredible that only He can do. You do what you can do, and let God turn that into something incredible. And trusting God like this isn't easy, right? I remember one time I saw a bumper sticker on a car. It said, "God is my co-pilot." Wrong answer. He's not the co-pilot. He's the pilot. He's got the wheel. And it's not easy to trust Him with that wheel, because we want to be in control, right? It's hard. It's really hard. It doesn't come naturally to us, but it is entirely worth it. Trusting God like that, with everything we've got, is so worth it. And it is one of the most direct ways that we can go all in when it comes to our faith. Trusting Him with everything is how we can go all in when it comes to our faith.